You already know about Cthulhu. You might have heard of the Mist. Maybe you're even familiar with the King in Yellow. These are all relatively well-known cosmic horror tales, but there are a bunch more out there that are rarely talked about, despite them being as good, if not better, than the popular ones. So welcome to this new series idea I had where I cover some lesser known cosmic horror stories, and each video will be a different theme. So for the first video we're gonna start strong and talk about monsters. Each of these cosmic horror stories is gonna feature a big monster. We all know that cosmic horror isn't defined by having monsters in it, but when they do appear, it can make for a great story. So get ready for some spoilers and let's get into it. The Thing That Walked on the Wind is a story by August Derleth, and it is an entry to the Cthulhu mythos. If you didn't know, the Cthulhu mythos is like a shared universe of these cosmic horror stories that started with Lovecraft, and then many others have added onto it afterwards. Actually, all of the stories that I mentioned today are going to be part of these Cthulhu mythos. So this story takes place in Stillwater, a small town in the wilderness of Canada where every single person mysteriously disappeared. Our narrator was at a camp exactly 1 year after this disappearance, and when he stepped outside, he couldn't see any stars, the wind got really strong, and it got really cold all of a sudden. Then, 3 bodies fell from the sky, 2 men and 1 woman. The men fell somewhat softly and were alive, surprisingly, but the woman fell with some force and she was not alive. They get put somewhere safe inside, and one of the guys comes to have consciousness and gives us a classic cosmic horror ramble. Deathwalker, God of the Winds, you who walk on the wind. Adoramiste, Adoramiste. Destroy these faithless ones, you who walk with death, you who pass above the earth. You who have vanquished the sky. Light gleams from the mosques of Baghdad. Stars are born in the Sahara. Lhasa, lost Lhasa. Worship, worship, worship the Lord of the Winds. So from the ramblings of this guy, our narrator is able to discern that the people of Stillwater worshipped air elementals and made sacrifices to them in the nearby forest. There are queer stories of some gigantic thing that these people summoned to their deeply hidden forest altars, and still weirder tales of something seen against the sky in the glare of huge pine fires burning near Stillwater by travelers on the Alassie Trail. Then the guy gains even more consciousness and asks what's going on. They explain to him that they saw him and the others falling from the sky, and once he hears that there was a girl with them, he starts to get a little upset. He asks them if they had seen the thing that walks on the wind, and that when they do, they won't be able to escape it. So it sounds like everybody here is in big trouble at this point. The doctor in the area starts getting this theory that the 2 men have been in the cold for so long that warming up might kill them, but he still lets them warm up. Also, the doctor seems to accept the fact that they were just chilling in the sky for the year that they've been missing. Now that the guy gained full consciousness, we get the whole picture. A year ago, him and his friend came to Stillwater because they were seeking refuge from a crazy storm. They went to the innkeeper to get a room, which he was very reluctant to give them. But eventually he did, and he told them to stay inside and not to get close to the window. They think that's a little weird, but it's better than being caught up in the storm. Once they're settled in, the innkeeper's daughter comes in and asks if they can save her. She explains that the village is planning to sacrifice her to Itakwa, which is the name of this air elemental that they're worshipping. But she herself isn't even 100% that he's real, so she doesn't want to lose her life over it. They are convinced to help her and they start fleeing the village. Here we get a description of this Itakwa from the guy. Towering height of the thing, seen against the sky in the hellish glow of the nocturnal fires. And after mentioning Itakwa, the guy starts to ramble a lot. It's like simply mentioning and describing this thing made him go even more insane. Naturally, Itakwa was mad that they took the girl and he didn't get his sacrifice. This is why he took every villager one by one, which explains the sudden disappearance of Stillwater. However, what I'm not sure with is why the 3 of them returned and everybody else from Stillwater is still somewhere in the sky suspended, waiting to drop. Another story from a different guy explains what happened when they were first investigating the Stillwater disappearance. It says that they followed 3 tracks from Stillwater on the Alassie Trail, 2 men and 1 woman. And they all disappeared suddenly, which makes sense if we accept the theory that Itaqua swooped them up. But there was other tracks, and much bigger ones, closely resembling the foot of a man, but certainly a giant, which appears to have been made by an unbelievably large thing. And the foot, though like that of a man, must have been webbed. Our narrator refers to the beginning of the story, when he first stepped outside that camp and saw no stars. Now that he's thinking about it, he understands that he saw the outline of a giant in the clouds, and where the head must have been, he did see two stars that looked like eyes. Then our narrator disappears too. In fact, this whole thing was read by his boss. But before he disappeared, he left one last note. One more thing. This afternoon, a half-mile behind Dr. Jameson's house, I came upon a deep depression in the snow. I did not need a second glance to tell me what it was. A half-mile on the other side of the house, there is another imprint like this. I am only thankful that the sun is rapidly distorting the outlines, for they are imprints of gigantic feet, and the feet must have been webbed. They find his body sometimes later buried in the snow, and in his pockets they find various cosmic horror memorabilia, such as statues of ancient beings. Very, very cool story. I have always loved stormy settings, like when the two of them are seeking refuge from the storm, which we now understand was probably Itaqua getting ready for a sacrifice. One cool thing about the story is that during those ramblings the guy was giving after being dropped from the sky, he was mentioning Algernon Blackwood and his stories about wind elementals, which I actually talked about in my Cosmic Horror of Impossible Places video, so it was very cool to see that crossover. He also mentions Lovecraft and Cthulhu in the context that those three were going on a sort of cosmic horror roller coaster during that year they were missing, and they were visiting Cthulhu's house, and all sorts of other cosmic horror locations, such as the Cho-Cho people of Burma, strange hybrid men living under the snow and ice of Antarctica, that there exists today a lost kingdom of the sea, a cursed Relia, where slumbering Cthulhu, deep in the water beneath the sea, is waiting to rise and destroy the world, and the plateau of Lang, where the ancient ones once ruled. The Black Stone is a story by Robert E. Howard, who is mostly famous for making Conan. But this is a very cool cosmic horror short story by him, that of course features a monster for the purposes of this video. So the narrator in the story comes across a mysterious black book that was written by a German guy who died under mysterious circumstances. He was found with talon marks on his throat, and the guy who found him cut his throat too. So as he's flipping through this crazy book, he comes across the mention of a black stone, which is somewhere in the mountains of Hungary. And apparently this is a mysterious monolith that does all sorts of crazy things on Midsummer's Night. He becomes increasingly fascinated with this monolith, and he discovers that it's in the village of Stregojkovar in Hungary, and it is surrounded by various superstitions. One of these is that if you fall asleep in the vicinity of the monolith, you will have nightmares forever. Another one is that people go mad after seeing something near the stone. And just from researching this thing, he says that he's able to feel some sinister aura coming from this thing that's touching some subconscious sense inside him. Now this is sounding like cosmic horror. Eventually, as if the stone itself pulled him in, he makes the trip to Hungary to see what's really going on at this stone. And this village is quite something. It's drowsy and sleepy, and it's 100 years behind with technology, but everybody is nice and friendly. So he goes in the tavern, and the very first guy he sees says that, oh yeah, another American came by a while ago. I think he went crazy from looking at the Black Stone for too long. So it looks like we're on the right track. So naturally, the narrator asks for directions to the place where he can go crazy, and the guy at the tavern gives them to him. And he gets to the stone and we get a cool description. It was octagonal in shape, some 16 feet in height, and about 1.5 feet thick. It had once evidently been highly polished, but now the surface was thickly dinted as if the savage efforts had been made to demolish it. But the hammers had done little more than to flake off small bits of stone and mutilate the characters which once had evidently marched in the spiraling line round and round the shaft to the top. After looking at the stone, he goes back to the village and he talks to some kid that got those forever nightmares to see what kind of nightmares he had. The kid said that he once dreamed of the stone and a matching black castle, which is interesting because it means that the stone is part of something much bigger, and if the stone alone is enough to make you go insane and give you nightmares for all infinity, I can't even imagine what the whole castle would do to you. The local school teacher has some theories that the stone is used by some local witches and a strange deity, giving us the first sign of our monster. So after chatting with everybody in the village, the narrator realizes that it's actually Midsummer Night. What a crazy coincidence. So he decides to check on the legends. He sits down by the stone, and as if it was some sort of spell, he falls asleep instantly. When he wakes up, he sees a strange crowd around the stone. Shorter, more squat race, whose brows were lower, whose faces were broader and duller. So they start dancing like crazy, and there's braziers filled with some sort of yellow smoke. And this is pretty much like every movie scene where there's a cult slash pagan worship sacrifice thing. They're wearing animal masks, and besides that, they're naked, dancing like they're possessed. And they keep saying some word that the narrator can't comprehend. And we get to the climax, and suddenly, on the monolith, there is a monstrous toad creature. I saw its bloated, repulsive, and unstable outline against the moonlight, and set in what would have been the face of a natural creature, its huge, blinking eyes, which reflected all the lust, abysmal greed, obscene cruelty, and monstrous evil that has stalked the sons of men since their ancestors mowed blind and hairless in the treetops. Pretty heavy stuff, so it's not just a toad monster, it's a evil sentient toad filled with all the evil of the world. And this evil is radiating from it, because he didn't talk to the toad. Just witnessing it let him know all these scary things about it. They lift up a girl towards the toad at the end, and the toad starts lustfully slobbering and sucking its breath, and then the narrator passes out. He does some research by digging up graves around the area, and he finds out that this toad was a thing that the Turks trapped in some sort of cave hundreds of years ago. A theory I came across is that this toad might actually be Tsatogua, an ancient old one created by Clark Ashton Smith. It is first described as very squat and pot-bellied. His head was more like a monstrous toad than a deity, and his whole body was covered with an imitation of short fur, giving somehow a vague sensation of both the bat and the sloth. His sleepy lids were half lowered over his globular eyes, and the tip of a queer tongue issued from its fat mouth. So this guy seems to be on the goofier end of the ancient old ones when you look at all the other ones. Okay, so what does this guy actually do? Well, he sleeps a lot unless you have a sacrifice for him. Then he will wake up to eat it. If you wake him up without a sacrifice, he will eat you instead. He can also shapeshift. Lovecraft once had him turn into a sinuous lion with countless legs. He can also talk to humans and reward them for sacrifices, which might very well be what was happening in the Black Stone story. Except we don't know what the reward was because the narrator passed out. Notebook Found in a Deserted House is a story by Robert Bloch, and this is quite a unique one because it is told from the point of view of a 12-year-old boy. So besides the incomprehensible terrors that are described here, you have to imagine that they are seen from a child's point of view, making them a lot scarier, of course. So after his grandma dies, he moves with his aunt and uncle in this forgotten part of the woods where there's no sounds, there's not even animals, much less people. So the woods are scary to him, but not only because he's a kid, but because his aunt and uncle are scared too. So there's pretty much nothing to do here, so he goes out exploring the forest. And during one of these trips, he comes across something quite strange. First, he hears something like water dropping in a bucket, but for some reason he compares it to blood instead of water. The noise stops for a second, and then it comes closer and is louder. And eventually it gets so loud, it's no longer like stuff dropping in a bucket, but like a bunch of men running. So then comes a weird smell, and this smell is so strong that he faints, but not before he saw something. And what he saw comes back in his dream. No human being can leave tracks in the mud, like goats' hoofs, all green with slime that smell awful. Not 4 or 8, but a couple hundred. It was real tall and all inky black, without any particular shape except a lot of black ropes with ends like hoofs on it. I mean, it had a shape, but it kept changing, all bulgy and squirming into different sizes. There was a lot of mouths all over the thing, like puckered up leaves on branches. He goes through some mythology books at home and comes across a mention of druids, which can raise storms. So he makes a theory that this thing he saw is something that the druids summoned out of the ground and worshipped. Which sounds like a pretty spot on explanation. I don't know if he was able to discern that from the mythology book, or the place itself put in some subconscious message in his mind. Then he mentions that they have two wells at the house, but one of the wells isn't working. It's all green and slimy, much like the tracks left by the thing were. Now there is a cousin coming to visit, and the uncle goes with a horse buggy to pick him up. Eventually, nighttime rolls around, and there's nobody here. Eventually, the horse comes, but the buggy is empty. Of course, the kid starts to think that this is work of the druids, that they took his cousin and uncle, and he's probably right. He has more dreams about the thing also. Dreams about the black thing like a tree, walking through the woods and sort of rooting itself to one particular spot so it could pray with all those mouths. Pray down to that old god in the ground below. I don't know where I got the idea that was how it prayed, by sort of attaching its mouths to the ground. Maybe it was on account of seeing the green slime. Or had I really seen it? I'd never gone back to look. Maybe it was all in my head. The druid story about them once, and the voice that said Shoggoth, and all the rest. So by now he knows way too much than he could have figured out from that mythology book, which means that these thoughts are somehow entering him in his subconscious or something like that. Also, we learned that this thing he saw is a Shoggoth, which is a prominent creature in the Cthulhu mythos that I first saw in At the Mountains of Madness. A Shoggoth is a massive amorphous creature made of self-shaping gelatinous flesh, like a giant intelligent amoeba. Typically about 15 feet wide, it can grow or shrink and form any organ or limb it needs. In its natural form, it appears as a chaotic mass covered in eyes, mouths, and pseudopods, capable of moving with terrifying speed and generating a powerful stench. However, after some research, I came to find out that despite the kid calling it a Shoggoth, the entity in the story isn't actually a Shoggoth at all, but a dark young of this creature. They're pretty similar, but the dark young are less powerful and have the distinct hoofs and the green goo, as well as a tree-like silhouette. So now the aunt disappears as well, and the kid decides that it's time to get some help in town. But then he hears footsteps outside, and it's none other than his cousin, but he's acting strange. He slips up and he says that he's from Arkham, when he's supposed to be from some other place. And he's not really happy with the idea of going to town. Eventually the mailman comes, and the cousin tells him that the kid left with his aunt and uncle, so he's lying. But the kid manages to escape with the mailman. As they're riding, he's telling him about the Shoggoths and the Druids and the Sabbath, which is the first time he's mentioning that, so I don't know where he got it. Of course, the skies get stormy, likely because of the Druids, and then they reach something on the road. The trees sort of come together, hanging over the next turn, and in the black, it looked as if they were alive, moving and bending and twisting to block our way. Lightning flickered up again, and I could see them plain, and also something else. Something black in the road, something that wasn't a tree. Something big and black, just squatting there, waiting, with ropey arms squirming and reaching. The buggy crashes, both of them fall out, and the Shoggoth grabs the horse. The kid starts running, and he says that the branches are laughing at him. I think metaphorically, but you can never be too sure with these stories. He eventually comes to a clearing, and he sees a cult event going on, sort of like in the Black Stone story. There are red and green fires, and there is cattle being sacrificed. And he's seeing all of these in flashes of lightning, which makes it 10 times scarier and more pronounced. Then the druid sacrificed some humans, which I can only imagine was his aunt and uncle. The ground began to shake. It was storming. There was thunder and lightning and fire and smoke and chanting, and I was scared half out of my wits. But one thing I'll swear to, the ground began to shake. It shook and shivered, and they called out to something, and in a minute something came. It came crawling up the hillside to the altar and the sacrifice, and it was the black thing of my dreams. That black, ropey, slimy, jelly tree thing out of the woods. It crawled up and it flowed up on its hoofs and mouths and snaky arms. And the men bowed and stood back, and then it got to the altar, where there was something squirming on top, squirming and screaming. The Shoggoth starts growing and swelling in impossible shapes, and that makes the kid check out. Once he wakes up, he's at the house, but there are people trying to break in. He can hear his cousin and other people too, and probably the Shoggoth as well. And they actually do manage to break in. His last sentence was cut off halfway. So that's an unfortunate ending to this one, but all the others too. I guess it's unavoidable with these kinds of stories. I really like this story, and the fact it was told by a kid makes it even scarier. I think it's the way he describes everything. It isn't filled with big words like Lovecraft or these other guys, so it makes it easy to understand and visualize. Also, it's hard to imagine how scary everything must have been for him. First, his grandma dies, then his aunt and uncle, and then he sees the scariest thing you could ever imagine.